Hey there. Before we get into today's episode, I want to talk about something that I don't bring up much here on the podcast. And that is the fact that I'm a coach and a trainer and I do workshops. I'm a speaking and leadership communications coach. And I just want to make it known that if that's something that is of interest to you, perhaps the company that you work for, then check out my offerings on my website at michaelashford.com. There's a few different coaching options there, but there's also my workshops. I've worked with a lot of different companies from nonprofits to for profit organizations on things like leadership communications. I do workshops that involve how to communicate well through conflict and change in the workplace. I also have a workshop on how to be a more confident speaker, and these workshops can be delivered virtually or in person. I do both. I don't really have a preference. They're both awesome, virtual or in person. And I just want to, again, let you know, perhaps you didn't realize that, but as we move into or closer to a new year, and I can't even believe I'm already saying that. If that's something that you're planning for the end of this year or for 2025, please reach out. Let me know. Again, go to my website, michaelashford.com. I've got a link in the show notes to some of those coaching and workshop specific pages. But go there and check things out. And if you are interested in bringing me into your company, or if you're interested in working with me one-on-one as your speaking and communications coach, let me know. Get in contact with me. You can always email me at michael@rethinkingcommunication.com. And I would love to work with you or your company in whatever capacity you think is best when it comes to communicating well with each other. That's what I'm here for. That's what this show is for. And I just wanted to, again, reiterate, I do these things as well as a workshop facilitator and as a host and as a coach. All right. So with that, let's get into this episode of Rethinking Communication. Welcome to Rethinking Communication. I'm your host, Michael Ashford. Come with me on a journey as I explore how we better connect with each other through the power of our words. For most of us, formal education left gaps in our ability to communicate well with each other, especially when trying to navigate conflict, inspire change, and overcome misunderstandings. I'm a former journalist, a speaking coach, and a communication expert, and my goal is to encourage you to rethink what it means to be an effective communicator, from the stage to the meeting room to the living room and everywhere in between. As I get started here today, I want to let you know that this episode is actually inspired by a Facebook post from my friend Jesse. Jesse and I actually were college roommates. We worked at the student newspaper at Kansas State University together. That's how we first met. He actually was my boss for a period of time, for a while, after I jumped into the marketing world. So I want to say, I want to give a shout out to Jesse. This post, or this episode, was inspired by a post of his on Facebook. And yes, there are some people that still use Facebook. I get a little dig in there. All right. So back in episode 38 of this show, back when it was called The Follow-Up Question and not what it's called now, Rethinking Communication, futurist Brian David Johnson said something that has stayed with me in the years since our conversation. And that was 3.5 years ago. Now, during that interview, Brian said, "The moment you engage with someone and you anticipate or presume to know what they will say, you've just limited that person." I referenced Brian's words in my first TEDx talk, and I regularly cite them when delivering keynotes or workshops on effective conflict communication. And Brian's quote stuck with me because it caused me to question the times that my assumptions or presumptions about others limited the fullness of who they are. I don't want to be the kind of person who limits another human being. And so Brian's words served as an uncomfortable but necessary mirror of my own behavior and actions. I recall Brian's quote again, here and now, because it helps expose a cunning and sometimes dangerous communication tactic we employ when we face disagreement or opposition that I want to bring to light in the remainder of this episode. Okay, so what is this tactic? Well, I'll explain it by giving you an example. So, as a former sports writer, I am keenly aware of the platform and attention athletes, especially professional athletes, but to a slightly lesser extent, college athletes. I'm aware of the platform and the attention that they have in our society here in the United States and really globally. They live under the intense glare of a nearly always on spotlight on their words and their actions, and they hold an immense amount of sway with the people who follow them, who support them, and even look up to them. So, heck, even though it was my job as a sports writer, it was tough, I'll admit it, to not get swept up in this vortex that surrounds high level, well known athletes. Now, some athletes shied away from the spotlight as much as they could, preferring instead to compartmentalize their lives into very public athlete personas and very private, off the field or off the court, personal selves. But there were always those athletes who did bring the fullness of who they were front and center onto the platform that their status as a public figure afforded them. And they used that visibility to share their political views, their social views, their religious views, their cultural views, and so on, to advocate for what they believed in. And inevitably, when they did this, they were met with this dastardly communication tactic that is the topic of this episode. Stick to sports, why don't you? I don't watch football for your political views, so shut up and play ball. Do you hear it? Let's go back to Brian's quote. The moment you engage with someone and you anticipate or presume to know what they will say, you've just limited that person. The stick to sports clapback, quote unquote, stick to sports, that has pervaded our discourse on deeply challenging and controversial topics. This is an attempt to limit another human being, relying on strict and uncompromising assumptions and presumptions about who they are and the value they bring to a particular issue. Now, this stick to sports refrain rang out at its most intense in my lifetime that I can remember when former NFL quarterback Colin Kaepernick chose to kneel during the national anthem in the 2016 season as part of a way to protest police injustices towards the Black community in America. I understand the feelings and the emotions that many people felt in the wake of Kaepernick's actions. Some saw Kaepernick as an activist rallying for a cause, and others saw him as a traitor to the country. Others still viewed his actions as ineffective, while others believe he caused more harm than good for an otherwise much needed topic of dialogue. But holy cow, did the stick to sports mantra or refrain echo for months and years in the wake of that. But it's not just sports. When a movie star weighs in on a sensitive religious issue, you hear it. When a school teacher raises an uncomfortable cultural concern with her students, you hear it. When Joe from customer support raises a concern about how Jane's sales team is bringing in new customers, you hear it. When a musician endorses a politician, you hear it. And by the way, that last one cracks me up because music and musicians, they've been used for years. Songs have been used for years, decades, to share political and social messages. Some subtle, like Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA, and some not so subtle, like Green Day's American Idiot, right? But here's why I call this communication tactic cunning and dastardly. Because as my friend Jesse pointed out in his Facebook post, it's dehumanizing and it's hypocritical. This desire to tell people to stay in their lane, quote unquote, their lane, reduces a person's value and worth to one data point. And that data point is what they do to earn a living. You're only as valuable as what you do to make money, is essentially what this is saying. And you're not allowed, at least in my world, when I say something like this, like stick to sports or stick to X, what you know, it's saying that your value, your opinion is not wanted or needed here, that it holds no value. For most of us, it is agonizing to face the discomfort that arises when what you value most from what a person does for a living clashes with what you value most morally. To put it in perhaps more plain terms, when your favorite football player or your favorite basketball player, when you cheer for them and you support them and you root them on and you wear their jersey number and you purchase tickets to go support them at their games, when they all of a sudden express an opinion that is different from you morally, that discomfort, that dissonance that occurs in your head is almost too much to deal with for many of us. We love our favorite sports players, but only if we can pretend they don't vote differently than we do, for example. And again, this is not just in sports. It's easy to take for granted the fact that you walk around with the complete and full knowledge of your own complexity as a human being. You know everything that's going on inside your head. But often you fail to acknowledge the same depth and richness in others. And when that blindfold is removed, to deal with that icky feeling, we stereotype. We presume to know how they can best show up in the world based on our standards, our morals, and we turn them into an easily discarded caricature. This allows us to dump our uncomfortable feelings and not have to deal with a world where two things, or perhaps multiple things, can be true at the same time. But I'm going to venture to guess that you would hate your own value to be reduced to what you did for a living. That the only thing that you could have an opinion on, that was the extent of what you were allowed to comment on, was what you did to make money to earn a living. Look, I'm a marketing director at a software company for my full-time job, and I love my job. But let's be honest, I'm way more than just a marketing director at a software company. And I no more want to stick to marketing any more than a fast food worker wants to stick to burgers, or a dentist wants to stick to teeth, or a basketball player wants to stick to basketball. In my job, I have opinions on development, engineering. I may not understand how to do it, and so I need to come in with a curious mindset, but I certainly have opinions on what we should be developing. I have opinions on sales, of course. I have opinion on customer support. I have opinions on finance. Is it what I do day in and day out and how I make my paycheck? No. But I still have them, and they still bring value if we can have a substantive conversation about it. And the same is true for you. Only you know the extent of your opinions, beliefs, and desires. But imagine if every time that you tried to give voice to those things outside of your chosen occupation or what you did for a living, your partner, spouse, child, parent, best friend, coworker, or even just some rando on the street, what if they came up to you and said, "No one's paying you for your opinion on that, so be quiet and just do your job"? You are more than what you do to make a living. Whether you have a platform like that of a professional athlete, musician, or actor, or whether your platform is just your 100-person Facebook friends list. Yes, there are experts and people with more knowledge of a situation or issue, but that doesn't stop you from having an opinion or having the right to an opinion, nor should it be a reason to prevent others from the same. This is a way of communicatively cutting someone off at the knees. It allows you to retain the fullness and complexity of nuance of who you are while not affording the other person the same, and that is dehumanizing. It requires that you enter into uncomfortable conversations with someone to understand, even if they don't have the fullness of the experience and the expertise that you do on a particular field or on a particular topic, it still can be worth the conversation, as uncomfortable as it might be. Because here's the squirmy little secret locked in this saying, stick to sports, and that's the umbrella term I'm using. Limiting someone in this way is a sneaky little way to get out of having perhaps an uncomfortable conversation, or having to deal with the dichotomy of enjoying a person's work product but not their personal beliefs, which is perfectly okay and reasonable. You don't have to agree with what someone else says, but you also don't get to police their ability to say it. You can control your own response, You cannot listen to their music or watch their games or buy their movies or hang out with them at happy hours. But you do not get to control how they use their platform and the opinions that they hold. If you seek to change someone's opinion, well, I would venture if that's really a helpful mindset to go into a conversation with. But even if you did, wouldn't you have to have a different approach than just telling them to stay in their lane? And this brings up the hypocrisy of it all. What is painfully obvious to me is that for most of us, if we were afforded the platform of a professional athlete or a rock star, you'd use that platform to promote the ideas and issues you care about most if you thought it would make a difference. It's why I've got this podcast and why I wrote a book. I wanted to create a platform to talk about things I care about and hopefully help others understand how I see the world of effective communication in this instance. It's also why my friend Jesse posted this on his Facebook account, the post that inspired this episode. It was a platform to share his ideas, thoughts, and opinions, and he thought it might influence others. And you can best believe that if I could grow my platform to the level of, say, my favorite NFL quarterback, Patrick Mahomes, go Chiefs, I would, without a doubt. And so would the vast majority of you listening. And you would use that space to talk about the things that you care about most beyond just always the things that you do for a living to make money. To demand that someone limit themselves in a space where, if given the chance, you'd behave the same as they do is hypocritical and communicatively dishonest. So what can you do about it? Well, first, I hope the phrase stick to sports or whatever variation of that phrase comes across your lips. I hope it never crosses your lips again. But if it does, I'd hope you realize it in the moment and begin to ask yourself some questions. What am I really upset about here? How would I act if put in the same situation or circumstance? What can I control here? Is there a fear or worry about this situation that I'm not addressing that I need to have a conversation about? To communicate well with others beyond the ways you were taught in school, it requires that you know yourself and your motivations far better than you were led to believe. This is at the core of my ask then see approach to conflict communication. To repeat that, the ask is assume positive intent, set aside your ego, and know that you can't know everything. And the C is search yourself, ask questions of yourself. E is explore other perspectives, ask questions about others. And the second E is exchange your curiosity with others. Go and ask others questions to get a fuller, richer, more nuanced, and more complex view of a situation. And as I said, to communicate well with people, to overcome the communicative approach of exertion, exerting on others your ideas and opinions and beliefs that you were taught in school, and switch to this more extractive approach. The ask then see approach to conflict communication is the way to do it, to get yourself in the right mindset, to assume positive intent of others and set aside your own ego and need to be right and ask a lot of questions. And stick to sports or whatever variation of that phrase that may come out. That is as an exertive force communicatively as any that I've seen or heard or come across. And we can't let it happen if we are to have honest and uncomfortable conversations that actually produce something on the other side that's worth it, that's something of value. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Rethinking Communication. Hope you enjoyed it. Share this episode with someone you know who might find some value in everything that I've covered today. Share it on your social media. Share it on LinkedIn. Tag me. Let me know what you thought of it. You can always email me your thoughts as well if you prefer that. It's michael@rethinkingcommunication.com, or you can go to my website, michaelashford.com, and reach out through the website. I'll catch you on the next episode of Rethinking Communication, and until then, keep asking questions.